Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Ryan, and I'm a guide for the Central Park Conservancy, the non-for-profit that takes care of Central Park year-round, keeping it clean and green, and the organization that you help to support. We help to keep this park looking beautiful for people to enjoy both physically and virtually. We know that right now it's not the easiest time for everybody to get to Central Park, so we wanted to offer virtual programming like our weekly walks and these members previews to allow you to join us in the park in real time. We're going to be taking a little exploration today of Sheep Meadow, a very historic and beautiful landscape. On our members preview today, you're going to get a little bit more of an in-depth and detailed look on Sheep Meadow and landscape we're going to be exploring this Wednesday for a weekly walk. We're going to be together for about 35 minutes today, and just about all of the pictures you're going to see on today's walk were taken by myself within the past week. We are also going to see a few other historic images that can be found on the New York City public municipal pages. A lot of the digital archives for these photos can be found by the public online. I'll share a few of these photos as we go. Before we begin, let's just do a little bit of housekeeping. So we are using Zoom, and some of you may have joined us on these public programs before. So on Zoom, you can participate. You can use the chat feature pictured on the far left. If you want to say hello or let us know where you're joining from, we encourage you to say hello in the chat. If you do have a question that you want answered, you can use the Q&A feature pictured right in the middle, and my colleagues Juan, Ian, and Jose are going to be on the back end answering any questions you might have. The last thing you'll see pop up here and there are going to be some visitor polls that I'm going to launch, which will allow us to interact with one another, and we can gauge and see everybody's response once everybody has voted. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We really love doing these virtual walks, and we're very happy to have the support of generous individuals like yourselves. Without your help, we certainly could not keep programs like this going or even keep the park looking so clean and green. And we know now more than ever, the park is especially important for not only New Yorkers, but for everybody to really escape to and get a little bit of respite and relief from, of course, the city, as well as everything else going on right now. Without any further ado, let's jump right into our walk of Sheep Meadow today. This is the general route that we're going to be taking with those larger red dots indicating some of the stopping points we're going to be stopping at and talking a little bit more. So let's jump right into it. We are going to begin our walk just over at 69th Street and 8th Avenue, or 69th and Central Park West. We're going to be starting at really an unnamed gate in the park, or an unnamed entrance. Right here on the west side at 69th Street, we do have kind of a lesser used or lesser frequented walkway. But once we start walking in this way, we're going to get, of course, the typical beautiful views, already seeing a little bit of those colors kind of changing up coming into an early fall season. I wanted to start us off here, though, for a specific reason, because as we start to walk down this path, we come to a statue that some people may have noticed before. You may have visited this statue just tucked away in the corner. We walk a little bit closer, we can see a little bit easier what it is. This is the 7th Regiment Memorial Statue. This is actually a statue that is honoring the 58 men that lost their lives serving the Union Army during the American Civil War between 1861 to 1865. This was actually dedicated here in 1874 by the sculptor who created this piece, John Quincy Adams Ward. Unlike many war statues, this one's actually depicting just the general soldier. Rather than depicting a general or lieutenant, this one again is meant to represent really all of the common men that were fighting during the American Civil War. One of my favorite details of this statue is actually cropped out on the bottom, but I'll pull up a little picture here. This is actually the 7th Regiment's motto, Pro Patria et Gloria, which stands for country and for glory. A really beautiful piece that we see over here tucked away in the corner. Now, it might be a little odd that we're starting over here with a war statue, but this actually does have a lot of relation to Sheep Meadow, which we're going to be exploring. One of my favorite parts about this statue is that the soldier is actually looking over towards Sheep Meadow. And the reason that we're actually stopping here is because Frederick Law Olmsted, one of the co-creators of the park, actually did suggest for this statue to be here. It originally was supposed to be at Warriors Gate, but we do find it sitting at Frederick Law Olmsted's original suggested site for this, gazing just over at Sheep Meadow. And the reason it's looking over at Sheep Meadow is because some of you may know, Sheep Meadow wasn't always supposed to be Sheep Meadow as we know it today. In the original design for Central Park, there was a requirement to have its space for parade ground. Not parade ground like Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, parade ground like military drills and activities. This was a requirement to have some area for the military to be using a park. Upon its completion around 1864, the Board of Commissioners overseeing Central Park's design realized that having military-run drills in the park doesn't really line up with what the purpose of this park was created for, to again provide an escape and respite from not only city life, but also just to really transform our perception of nature, get us out there, have us be in a healthier mindset, and really again escape from all that city life. So the idea for using this as a parade or military ground was pretty quickly abandoned. Another thing you'll notice in this picture is that Sheep Meadow wasn't always called Sheep Meadow. It used to be called the Green. And we'll learn in just a little bit how it went from being called the Green to being called Sheep Meadow. But we're going to start making our way back to present day. And as we start to leave the 7th Regiment Memorial statue, we're going to take a little walk across this crosswalk. Of course, look both ways when we're walking in the street because bikers will be coming at any moment. And then once we got across safe, we can start bearing over to the left and kind of getting our first glimpse of what Sheep Meadow is. As we start to walk over, we'll certainly see the expanse, certainly one of the best areas to capture buildings, if that's your reason for coming to the park. But of course, we're coming here to see some lush nature. So we'll walk a little bit further down the path and we'll come up to an entrance for Sheep Meadow. You'll notice there are a few designated entrance and exits. Another thing we can notice as we enter are a few of the rules for Sheep Meadow. This is one of the areas in the park that's a quiet zone, meaning you're not allowed to have amplified sound, radio. You're actually not allowed to have dogs on here either. There are a few landscapes where dogs are not permitted. And one of these reasons that there's no dogs and no sound or no loud sound is really to provide a nice peaceful respite. And that's certainly what Sheep Meadow does, and certainly what we'll see as we walk in and see people enjoying this beautiful landscape. As we start to walk in, we'll certainly see that expanse occurring. And what I actually want to do here is I want to launch one of our first polls. Now that we can start to get a little bit more of an idea and kind of put Sheep Meadow to scale, I want to launch our first poll and see if anybody wants to take a guess how large Sheep Meadow is in terms of acres. So acres can be kind of confusing, but generally one football field, one American football field, is roughly 1.3 acres. I'm really bad at kind of spacing things out, but maybe that'll help. So again, one football field, roughly 1.3 acres. So we have a lot of our votes pouring in. Again, once you vote on these polls, they will disappear. And once we get just about everybody voted, I'll share the results and we can see what everybody's consensus is. All right, and thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Looks like we have about 150 people joining us today, and I'm really happy about that. We love doing these virtual programs, especially when we have a nice crowd and nice participation. So I'm gonna end this poll in just a moment, and we'll start to see what our first results are. Okay, so I'm gonna end this poll and share results. And it looks like we have a lot of educated people here. We have 15 being the highest guess at about 29%. And 15 acres, surprisingly, is what Sheep Meadow is. Might look a lot larger, but 15 acres is all that Sheep Meadow is. I put 55 acres as the last guess because that's actually the acreage of the Great Lawn, which is going to be the largest grassy area we have here in Central Park. But there are over 300 acres of grassy areas within Central Park. But of course, this is going to be one of the more famous ones and what we like to call Manhattan's backyard. Certainly great job everybody guessing there. I'll launch another poll or two as we start to go and ask another question or two. But for now, let's take a little right on Sheep Meadow and start walking by this tree cover. As we start to walk to the right, we can see some nice willow oaks providing a great shady area on the north section of Sheep Meadow. Walking just underneath these trees, we'll see a little bit of that classic Manhattan mica schist, the bedrock of New York. And again, the reason Manhattan has its name, Mannahatta, being Isle of Many Hills, a Native American term. We do see this rock present throughout a lot of different landscapes, but not so much in Sheep Meadow, which is interesting because Sheep Meadow did not always look like a grassy field. This is actually the rockiest and one of the swampiest areas of Central Park that was transformed to look almost completely the opposite. As we all know, Central Park is completely man-made and meant to mimic nature. Sheep Meadow in particular was actually an extremely rocky area. There were reports of 16-foot high schist cliffs in this area, as well as just a lot of swampy low-lying areas. These needed to be blasted away using gunpowder, boring holes, filling it with gunpowder, and then running away. These large chunks would go into construction for other parts of the park, but we see this area surprisingly being the most expensive part of the park to make. Yes, you heard that right. This flat field was the most expensive area in Central Park to create during the 1800s. We also, after all this rock was removed, see a lot of dirt and soil being brought in, about 1 million cubic yards of soil. Kind of paint a picture of how much that is. You take the Empire State Building and fill that up with soil. That's how much dirt was carted in and barged in from areas of New Jersey and Long Island to spread over in parts of the park, especially here in Sheep Meadow. Today, of course, we don't really see too many remains of these rocky features, but you can find a few like this on the northern end, as well as on the southern end, which we'll see in a little bit. But certainly a cool characteristic of Central Park and Manhattan in general. As we start walking down a little bit farther, as we might know today, Sheep Meadow is the name of this area that originally was called the Green. And the reason it was called Sheep Meadow is because at one point, sheep were released. Once we do see the government kind of abandoning, or rather the Board of Commissioners abandoning the idea to use this as a parade ground, we do see a different inhabitant coming on, Dorset and South Down sheep. These sheep were brought on to really add to, again, the sense of the park, which was meant to be an escape and really to be like a living painting. The sheep being brought on here were meant to mimic an upstate New York countryside. And it's really interesting seeing these sheep grazing with all the buildings in the back. The idea was that you could come and sit and watch these sheep graze and really just forget you're in the middle of New York City. These sheep lived on the meadow for quite some time. They were introduced in 1864, and they actually stayed here for 70 years until 1934. We'll see in just a little bit where these sheep spent most of their time. But for the first 5 or 6 years, they did live right out here on the meadow, both day and night. And they acted as the natural lawnmowers, as well as the fertilizers. Back then, these fields and meadows weren't used for recreation like we see today. So they were really just to act again as like a living painting and really connect us to a more natural pastoral landscape. Today, of course, no sheep. We do have a lot more people picnicking, and we do have a lot of really just nicer grassy areas accompanied by some of these beautiful trees. This is a sawtooth oak that we see some people enjoying, and we do choose a lot of the trees to be going on Sheep Meadow for different purposes. As we walk down a little bit, we can see nice views of shady areas under these trees. Under these willow oaks, we get a little bit of a taste of nature, buildings, of course, grassy areas as well. Walking down a little bit more towards the west side, we're going to start to see actually one of my favorite trees on Sheep Meadow, which is going to be a very, very large sawtooth oak. This is a great example of a tree chosen to allow for a lot of shade for people to take nice picnics under and really just enjoy a nice break from that sun. Not too sunny today, so we did have a nice cool day when I was walking around and taking pictures. But certainly a favorite tree of mine. And just over to the right of this tree, we can see some people over here on the left that are actually having a little children's concert. So again, no amplified sound, but you are allowed to play maybe a small acoustic instrument or something like that, as long as you give other people enough respectful space. But certainly a great landscape. And if we turn around now, we can actually exit Sheep Meadow just really quickly so we can see where those sheep spent a majority of their time. If we exit this corner, on the northwest corner of Sheep Meadow, we're going to cross the street once more, again, looking both ways before we do cross. And once we cross, we are going to see a little building tucked away over here. What this is not only actually the finish line to the New York City Marathon, which typically occurs every November, but we're actually going to see a very historic building existing just back there in the corner. As we walk up, we are going to be walking to the original sheepfold, which some of you may know today as Tavern on the Green. A lot of people don't realize that Tavern on the Green originally was created for a sheepfold to store the sheep that lived on the green. If we look at their logo, the hint is actually lying right in plain sight. Using sheep for their logo is actually a way to pay tribute to what this building used to be. And this was an original structure created in Central Park. This was created around 1870, and we do see the sheep moving in very shortly after. There have been a few additions put onto this building, but largely what we see on this building is original and has been restored. We can see many of the beautiful original decorations and stone masonry, which was constructed or designed rather by Jacob Ray Mold, one of the designers and ornamentationalists for the park, working closely with Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. But we see that beautiful polychrome masonry illustrated along a lot of different portions of what is now Tavern on the Green. And again, we probably realize it makes a little more sense now, Tavern on the Green, because the Sheep Meadow was originally called The Green. We do see Sheep Meadow eventually taking name around the 1930s once the sheep really kind of have been living here for a while. So the sheep were living here from about 1870 until 1934. After that, we do eventually see the sheep being sent over to Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Once the sheep have left this building, we do see it eventually being transformed into Tavern on the Green, a restaurant for the park. These are some photos that are from the New York City archives, and we do see some of the original architecture just over here on the left-hand side of this picture as it's being transformed into a restaurant. What I really love about this building is how they kept so much of the original structure intact and actually restored and revitalized it. If you were to walk today into Tavern on the Green, you can see a lot of the original beams and these wooden trestles found on the top that are still in use. And one of the interesting things is actually that Tavern on the Green, during one point, became a visitor center for the Central Park Conservancy. For a very brief period, you could visit what was Tavern on the Green and get a map of Central Park and learn a little bit about its history. But if you do walk into Tavern on the Green today, you can see these wooden trestles up top, which are original to the structure and have been restored over time. I do have I see a question, why were the sheep removed here? So the sheep were removed for a couple different reasons. One of the theory was that people might start poaching the sheep and actually eating them. And you can imagine the sheep left around the 1930s, 1934. So this was kind of a little bit after, or kind of a little bit during the Great Depression here in America. So I think one of the kind of nerving ideas was that, oh no, people might start kind of eating the Dorset and Southdown sheep that were living in this area. So the sheep again eventually were moved to Prospect Park in Brooklyn. I do want to actually launch a second poll over here that I find pretty interesting. I want to just see if anybody knew that Tavern on the Green at one point was a sheepfold. A lot of people walk by this area or even come here to eat and don't even realize that there used to be a bunch of sheep living on the downstairs. There was a sheep herder that was actually on the Parks Department payroll, and he was in charge of really just caring for these sheep. The sheep got to live on the downstairs, which did not have a floor. It was just open and dirt. And then there was a second floor in which the sheep herder and his family lived. But they would have a nice little commute walking from this building just across the street to the Green. So I do see most people voting. I'm going to end that, and we can see that most people didn't know it, and that's not surprising because a lot of people come here and don't realize that. I certainly for a long time did not realize that this was actually a sheepfold, but there's always something new to learn about a building in Central Park or some history in an area or another. But really, really cool. So I'm glad some people learned a little something new. We're going to keep continuing back to present day now. And what we're going to see, we're going to pass to the left over here. We're going to see some early fall blooms already coming in. These are grape-leaved anemones. It's a perennial plant. It does have kind of grape-shaped leaves, which is where that grape leaf name comes from. And they actually bloom in early fall. So this is probably one of the first fall blooms we're starting to see, especially with that chill starting to come into the air. These are actually really cool plants because they do well in sun, shade, really wherever. So this is a nice hardy plant that we have blooming just outside Tavern on the Green. We'll keep an eye out for any more blooms we might see as we go. As we do walk down the path, we're going to cross this carriage path real quick and come back across the street to, of course, our main highlight, Sheep Meadow. Again, look both ways before we cross the street. And as we come over, we are going to be entering this path in just a moment or two. But first, I want to take a quick peek over to our right. We're going to see on our right this tree, specifically an Osage orange tree. Osage orange trees are pretty interesting. They're actually a dioecious tree. Dioecious trees means that there are male and female trees. This is specifically a female Osage orange. And some of you may be familiar with the female Osage orange trees because of what they produce. Large orange-shaped or more like softball-sized fruits. These are actually not oranges, but otherwise known as hedge apples, and they're produced by the female Osage orange. These are, again, giant, about the size of a softball. They make a great food source for squirrels and a lot of other wildlife. One of my favorite sights to see in Central Park is to watch a squirrel try to drag one of these up a tree. It weighs just about almost as much as a squirrel, so it definitely takes a lot of effort, but it's worth the reward. This tree in particular, I wanted to highlight because not only is it a really beautiful tree, this is possibly a pre-park tree. Osage oranges don't really get too big, maybe about 40 feet or so, but they can live quite a long time. The oldest Osage orange known is about 300 years old, at least 300 years old, found at Virginia Tech. This is a tree that's estimated by arborists and other conservancy members possibly be pre-park, over 150 years old. This could possibly be a tree that was here maybe before the park was constructed, or even a tree that was possibly planted by Frederick Law Olmsted, Calvert Vaux, or one of the many gardeners that helped create Central Park. But certainly a really beautiful tree that we see just tucked here at the southwest corner of Sheep Meadow. Again, it might not look as big as some of the elm trees we see growing parallel to this over near the mall, but this tree may be twice as old as some of those trees. Really amazing to see this living fossil in a way here on the corner of Sheep Meadow. So we're going to actually jump back across to Sheep Meadow and start walking in on the southern edge again. As we do walk in, you'll notice that some areas are a little kind of worn out. These patches and these kind of lines that we're seeing are called desire lines, and they come from constant compaction of soil. Of course, we do have a lot of people using the park today, and of course, we have had a lot of people using Sheep Meadow over its long history. Once those sheep leave in 1934, we do eventually see a transformation of this area. We see it going from an area that you would just look over to an area that you would actually engage with. And we do see a lot of events occurring here, especially towards the 50s and 60s. During that time is when we see a lot of love-ins and be-ins, a lot of war protests. There are many Earth Day gatherings. We do see a lot of initial parades actually being formed and really having a historical connection to Central Park. The first ever gay pride parade actually ended here in Central Park, and a lot of these other different concerts and gatherings would occur. This picture in particular is a be-in from the 1960s protesting the Vietnam War. But we do see many other events like concerts being held here, and unfortunately, not a lot of care being provided to Sheep Meadow and the rest of Central Park. This is a photo post Barbra Streisand's concert on Sheep Meadow. And of course, we see really a lot of bad things with this photo. Not only do we see a lot of trash everywhere, but we see things like this packer or trash truck over here on the left. Today, of course, we certainly do not drive heavy vehicles or trucks or things like that onto Sheep Meadow unless we're caring for the grass. So a lot of improper practices were done, which led to these types of landscapes looking really quite the opposite, looking like this. The green became the brown, the Great Lawn became the Great Dust Bowl. These landscapes were just worn out and needed heavy restoration in order to correct them. Sheep Meadow was actually the first landscape that the Central Park Conservancy restored when we formed in 1980, our first project, and the goal was to, of course, correct this landscape, getting it back to a nice, healthy green color. And really, of course, restoring the lungs of Manhattan as they're kind of known today. These areas received a lot of restoration. There are, again, over 300 acres of grassy areas in Central Park, and we do have wonderful turf care teams that restore these areas. Today, we're lucky enough to have a very healthy landscape. We do have a combination of Kentucky bluegrass, tall fescue, vine fescue, perennial ryegrass, and other mixes that are seeded around this area. And again, 300 acres of grass is a lot of area to maintain. With over 42 million visits a year of people coming to the park, we do have a lot of wear and tear. And we at the Central Park Conservancy have developed a few different fundamental turf care practices to help keep these areas looking so beautiful. Of course, that involves mowing, irrigation, fertilization, aeration, restoration, and integrated pest management. By prioritizing this kind of turf care and managing lawn access, we can actually really monitor this area and keep it green and healthy for so many people to use. And we do have, again, a lot of different ways in which we do that, like this photo of one of our dedicated Central Park operations staff aerating the soil. Aeration, as well as, again, giving the soil time, or the grass and soil time to rest, is very important. That's why you'll notice that Sheep Meadow is closed after heavy rainfalls, because rain makes the soil and turf about 75% more susceptible to damage. After any large events, after any large gatherings, you will see the lawns even being closed to allow them to rest. Different practices like this help keep this grass looking so clean and beautiful for many, many people to come and picnic on. And as we start walking along the south edge of Sheep Meadow, we see, again, some more of that classic Manhattan mica schist rising out. This is one of my favorite types of areas where we get the blend of both rock and grass here. But a beautiful area, and of course, a beautiful day with plenty of people picnicking and enjoying that nice soft grass. As we walk along the south section, we are going to, of course, see more expansive views, as well as a nice little tree line. Along each kind of corner or area of Sheep Meadow, we do see different trees being used for different purposes. Some are planted in these formal lines, and they're going to provide not only aesthetic beauty, but they're also going to provide some shade for people to enjoy on those hot summer days. And these trees in particular also have a nice look to them when we look up close. They're a tree I'm sure we've all seen before, especially if you've walked around any New York City park or street. This is the most common street tree to find in New York City, a London plane tree. London planes are going to be crosses between American sycamores and Oriental planes. They're really great at dealing with pollution and toxins, taking them in and expelling them through that shedding bark, which is also how they're growing. It also provides a really beautiful camouflage type look. And the leaf of the London plane tree might look a little familiar. Maybe you've seen that before if you visited New York City Park. And the reason you've probably seen that before is because that is theorized to be the logo of the New York City Parks Department. So we can see London planes really found not only throughout city streets, but also throughout really just about any New York City park that we visit. As we continue walking along these London plains, though, we'll certainly get some nice sweeping views. This southern section has some of the more sweeping hills and some of the more rock present, which again kind of give us a reminiscent reminder of what this area used to be, really rocky and cliffy. So we're going to keep walking down along. And we're going to see a few more rocks protruding from the ground. I love these, how they come up like waves, just kind of breaking through the grass. And as we walk up to this rock, we're going to see kind of a little different coloration with this one. Not only is it a great spot to sit, as one park patron is doing, but it's also a really cool kind of geology lesson. This Manhattan mica schist was created about over 500 million years old. It's the oldest thing we're going to have certainly in New York. And it got its cool shape and grooves from a glacier. A receding glacier passing through this area is what carved out those different grooves and striations in much of the Manhattan mica schist. And on its travel, it also left a few things behind. Glacial erratics. Glacial erratics, like this rock, are different types of rocks, boulders, and debris that were left behind from this glacier receding through. The creators of the park, Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted, really liked the natural geology of this area, so they decided to keep a lot of this in. So we do see a few of these glacial erratics located on the southeastern corner of Sheep Meadow. A really cool look at the natural geology of New York, really America. Walking past this person enjoying the rock, we'll again get just nice sweeping views at every area. We have buildings like the, I believe that's Majestic in the background right there. But again, we're not too concerned with the buildings. I'm more concerned with the beautiful sweeping, expansive views. It's amazing to come see a large field like this in the middle of Manhattan. And again, this is not even the largest grassy area we have in Central Park. But we'll keep walking along this east side, and we'll see a little surprise here, or we would have about 100 years ago. Again, Sheep Meadow has been used for a lot of different things. Upon research, one of my colleagues, Ian, found a really cool New York Times article from October 19th, 1917. So this October 19th, 1917 article talks about a German U-boat that was displayed here on Sheep Meadow. This is a UC-5, or a German mine-laying submarine. This was actually captured by British forces in 1916. And after a lot of negotiation, This was actually brought here and displayed on Sheep Meadow as part of an exhibition to help really sell war bonds. This would be like if there was a cool pop-up performance or pop-up display here in the park today, just to generate excitement and bring people in. And of course, hopefully have people buy some war bonds. But this large UC-5 German submarine was actually shipped here to Sheep Meadow, of course coming down the river and then eventually being separated into 3 pieces. You can actually see these little white markings kind of here in the middle. So this was cut into 3 pieces, dragged out by a crane, and then shipped over here to Sheep Meadow in specialized trucks designed for it. And instead of the trucks driving, the trucks were actually pulled by 48 horses each. So 3 separate trucks, each one being pulled by 48 horses, brought these submarine pieces down here to Sheep Meadow. And it actually was made into a big event because there was a brass marching band leading them. Once they were brought here, they were reassembled. And again, this would be an exhibition where people could come and view this really piece of history. We can see on the right-hand side some spectators coming to see this really interesting submarine. And on top of that, we do eventually see a British tank being brought here as well that was used for war activities in France. But really amazing history. Everything from protests to concerts to exhibitions like this have been taking place on Sheep Meadow over its long, long history. So back to present day, and we're going to be right on the bottom southeast corner of Sheep Meadow, and we're going to walk up north to a last little stop or two. As we walk up on this side, we see a different collection of trees, many different really tall oak trees that provide kind of a shady path, as well as block off this little kind of road we have on the right. Of course, you won't notice anybody playing any recreational or organized team sports on Sheep Meadow because that isn't allowed. But if you look just to the right, we'll see some people playing some team sports because that's where the sand volleyball courts exist, right along Center Drive, which is covered up very nicely by those trees. One of the reasons all those oak trees are there is to really cover up this road because again, we want to see nice pastoral settings and kind of forget about modern architecture like paved roads. But we do have plenty of people enjoying a nice sand volleyball court over here. And walking up, a few spectators of the volleyball game, some regular patrons you can find here on Sheep Meadow. Of course, a pigeon and a squirrel, which we'll see plenty of gathering some of these acorn nuts that we have on the bottom of this area. We'll continue walking just up this path though, and we can see how nice and shady in contrast this area is to the few other areas we've been walking around. This is going to be a great area to have a picnic and really get away from that hot sun, as we can see some patrons on the bottom left doing, spreading out a little blanket. So we're going to keep walking just up a little bit, and we're going to again get all these nice sweeping views. What I love about Sheep Meadow is we can walk around and really see the same type of view, but always get a different feeling coming from it. Everything from the buildings changing to even just slight topographical changes make this meadow a beautiful sight, and no matter the weather too. Walking up a little bit more, we're going to come up to a favorite pathway that borders the northern section of Sheep Meadow. And this pathway that we're going to come up to is going to be Nelsinger Lilac Walk. We're going to walk down it in just a moment. But first, I want to focus on that beautiful little viney plant growing on the fence. This is going to be Devil's Darning Needle. It's another type of kind of perennial plant that'll bloom up, and it's one that you can find growing along the fences all around Sheep Meadow. And again, those fences aren't meant to make it more difficult for you to get in and out of Sheep Meadow. They're meant to really control exiting and entering, as well as, again, allow us to close the lawn after heavy rain or heavy use. But they do also provide a beautiful little post for this beautiful Devil's Darning Needle to grow. So it's certainly a nice little plant that we see blooming right now. And again, every season you come to Central Park, you can find something blooming. So just because you're coming into the fall or even winter, doesn't mean you won't find something beautiful popping up somewhere in the park. As we start to exit this park right here, we're gonna walk down Nelsinger Lilac Walk and come to our ending location for our walk today. Before we do, I do just wanna bring up this nice little plaque that you'll find at the beginning of Nelsinger Lilac Walk. And I think this phrase or this reading right now especially really resonates and really is a great example of why people come to the park. Even during periods of harsh conflict and confrontation, the delicate beauty and fragrance of the lilac have been faithful annual reminders of a lovelier aspect in human relations. This is a tribute of those aspects in Lilac Walk dedicated to the people of the city of New York. Nell Singer Lilac Walk, and this was dedicated here on April 8th, 1970. Certainly a favorite to come by in the spring when you can see both common lilacs and Japanese lilacs, as well as other plants blooming. But of course, no matter the season, we'll see something like that devil's darning needle, or just get a beautiful fragrance or view. As we do start to walk down a little bit more, we're going to come to our ending location, which is going to be just up here, kind of on the middle north section of Sheep Meadow. And I want to end with a personal favorite view that I really love, which is kind of a combination of everything we see. Central Park, really all areas are meant to create some type of framed picture. And this is one of my favorite views of Sheep Meadow because we get a little bit of everything. We actually have some views of some of the cherry trees, the ornamental cherry blossom trees located on the north section of Sheep Meadow. We get that kind of framed view where it covers up a lot of those buildings and sky, gives us a peek onto the expansing grassy area of Sheep Meadow, but doesn't give us the full taste. And that's really part of the point of Central Park. We don't ever get to see the full thing, so it keeps us coming back, it keeps us enjoying the park, and it keeps us really escaping from all the city life that we like to forget about. So this will bring us to the end of our walk. But I do want to again extend a very, very, very big thank you to everybody for not only joining us, but again for being members of Central Park Conservancy, because we would not be able to do the work we do here in the park without help from you. And we're very happy to keep this park looking beautiful for those visiting both physically and virtually. Thank you again. We plan to do a lot more of these member sneak peeks and member previews, where we'll be able to give you a lot more detailed history than we do on our typical weekly walks. But of course, we have plenty of other ways to stay involved and take virtual tours throughout the park. We do have our weekly walks occurring every Wednesday at 12:30, which are about 15-minute lunchtime strolls. We do also on Tuesdays and Thursdays offer different virtual tours that will be about 45 minutes long, covering some of our regularly offered and maybe even new areas of the park. Of course, if you do want to share any stories with us, you can use the hashtag MyCentralPark and maybe be featured online or even on one of those cool signs throughout the park. There are, again, self-guided tours, as well as a lot of these virtual tours, which are uploaded to our YouTube channel, which you can find on centralparknyc.org or under Central Park NYC, or under the Central Park Conservancy YouTube channel. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Please be on the lookout for upcoming virtual programs and more members sneak peeks. And thank you all from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy. Stay safe and be well.